Tens of thousands of protesters in Russia took to the streets this weekend to demand the release of jailed opposition leader Alexey Navalny. Some demonstrators stood in temperatures well below zero, and more than 3,000 people were reportedly arrested. Navalny was detained last week following his return to the country after being poisoned in August. His return comes days after his anti-corruption foundation released a viral report accusing President Putin of secretly building a palace worth more than $1 billion. So with more on this, we are joined now by CBS News foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, you know, when Navalny returned to Russia, I remember thinking, what is he doing? He has barely escaped with his life, and no doubt nothing good can come from this. But now that I see the protests that erupted, you know, maybe this was maybe he played this chess game well. I don't know. You know, just kind of bring us up to speed. What has happened over the weekend? Why did supporters and protesters take to the streets?
Well, Navalny has always said that he could not stand in opposition in exile. If he was representing the opposition, he had to do it within Russia itself. And as you said, many people are saying, well, is this courageous? It's certainly provocative. What we saw were these huge protests, not necessarily in terms of numbers, but in terms of how widespread they were. 109 cities across 11 time zones, as you mentioned there, some just below the Arctic Circle, like 60 below. And you had scenes where, you know, protesters were pelting police with snowballs and other objects. And, you know, we've seen this in other places. It just doesn't happen in Russia. I've been to plenty of these anti-Putin, anti-Kremlin demonstrations, anti-corruption demonstrations, 2017, 2012. But it is illegal to pelt a policeman with anything in Russia. So it's certainly the protesters and the demonstrators are becoming more brave and courageous. As you mentioned, according to activist sites anyway, 3,500 people have been arrested. They were answering the call of Navalny when he arrived. I mean, he said, whether it was tongue-in-cheek or not, you know, he said, why should I be arrested? I think the whole world expected that he would be arrested. But in that time, he called for supporters, in his words, to take to the streets. So his, you know, campaign group suggested that they do exactly that this weekend, and you saw what happened. And they seem to be growing in numbers, using platforms like social media in a call against anti-Kremlin, anti-Putin, anti-corruption.
So, Charlie, as you know, the Russian government then attempted to remove social media posts that were used to help organize the protest. The Russian government also tried to downplay the numbers of people that were protesting to the streets. I mean, again, we can just show the video and you can see the thousands. And this happened in, let's remind some folks, in some parts of Russia, it was negative 58 degrees and people were taken to the streets in protest. So what more can you tell us about their attempts to silence the opposition on social media?
Well, you can see that's absolute determination when you've got supporters for Navalny. And I have to mention here, it's not necessarily Navalny himself that people have come out to support, but his notion, the anti-corruption platform, the anti-Kremlin, anti-Putin. People have had enough. But yes, the Russian media watchdog tried to shut down you know, channels, his YouTube channel, for instance, TikTok, Instagram, from encouraging demonstrators and protesters to come out and turn out into the streets. It's worth noting here, Anne-Marie had mentioned that video, which is a sort of documentary. It's 2 hours long, that purports that President Putin has received this palace from ill-gotten gains, however that may have been, on the Black Sea. It has been viewed more than 20 million times in Russia itself, 85 million times. You're seeing it right there, 85 million times internationally. So much to the point that President Putin himself, who never addresses things like this, he will never utter Navalny's name in public, never has. He had to address this issue today, and he said, look, I have nothing to do with that. I do not own that palace. None of my family owns that palace. And for him to actually address that this is something that he must address and he must put out there shows that he is certainly, Navalny and his supporters have gotten under the skin of President Putin.
You know, I mentioned that I was surprised that he was returning to Russia. You know, explained that as opposition leader, he feels like he's a politician, right? I mean, he's got to be in the country with his people. But give us a little background again. You know, he was arrested as soon as he got off the plane. What was the case that was involved in that arrest? Like, what is the excuse that they're giving, at least?
Well, Anne-Marie, yes, it's important to note that, you know, people say, well, why was he forced to return to Russia? He wasn't forced to return to Russia. Nobody was asking him. He was in Germany. Nobody in Germany said he should go back to Russia. He did it on his own volition, his argument being that he needed to be in Russia in order to inspire the opposition. And, you know, clearly, if that was his plan, it worked. I don't know whether he thought he would not be going to jail, but the Russians have said that the reason he was arrested is he had breached a parole violation. He was. I shouldn't laugh because it's very serious, but the idea is that he was in breach of a parole for an embezzlement allegation, which he flatly denies, going back to 2014, 2015. The reason I have to laugh is because he was in breach because he was literally sitting in a hospital after an assassination attempt on his life, and he was in Germany, so there was no way that he could sort of appear for his parole hearing. So this is the situation that we're in. He has been arrested by Russian authorities. It's been extended now for 30 days, so roughly the first week of February, there will be another hearing where this suspended sentence, which was supposed to be for 3.5 years, they may actually implement it. There's always been this sort of weird harassment with Navalny. Yes, they have had plenty of opportunities to arrest him for several allegations anyway, but they've been these little terms, suspended sentences, more a sense of harassment rather than actually locking him up. But yes, he would have known that those threats, imprisonment, or even worse, were awaiting him once he touched down in Moscow.
Which clearly inspired people to take to the streets. It's surprising to me, Charlie, though, that the Russian government themselves would not surmise what we're talking about here, which is, hey, you know what? If we arrest Navalny, we could have a real problem on our hands with people taking to the streets in opposition, so let's not do that. But, you know, it's hard to ever figure out what Vladimir Putin is thinking. Your point about him coming out strongly against the allegations about that palace, though, are really well noted. Charlie D'Agata, always great to have you, my friend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vlad.